And we have our national champion on the women's side of things, South Carolina, taking care of Iowa and what was and will be Caitlin Clark's final college game as she heads to the WNBA, and setting records with the overall hype around the sport. It's never been better. The attention to the product has never been greater. And Chad, I'm not sure if we're going to see the type of numbers that we've seen without that next stir the pot villain that will play into what was a record-setting and possibly greatest performance that we've seen throughout a career. That was Caitlin Clark. Phenomenal job as she heads to the pros. And what was a game that Iowa was? I mean, they were playing well until the finish. Caitlin Clark was playing well until the finish. 18 points in the first quarter of the title game. And, well, South Carolina too much.
Yeah, it's weird to come in on a day where South Carolina finishes off an unbeaten, perfect season, national champion, and asking the question right out of the gates of what's next for the women's game after the loser of that national championship game, Caitlin Clark, is done playing college basketball. But that is the reality of why people tuned in for women's college basketball throughout the last two seasons. And the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, I would say, really started last March in their run to the national championship game and their upset of South Carolina in the semis and before losing to LSU in the national championship game. This year, Caitlin Clark Beatlemania-style fervor was from the opening tip on. Iowa's selling out games at home. They're selling out games on the road. There's enormous crowds waiting to get into gyms all across the Midwest throughout the year. So it was a big deal all season long for Caitlin Clark, and rightfully so. That Beatlemania-type tour took its tour bus all the way through March, through the women's tournament, and it ended on the last possible night Caitlin Clark could have been playing in college basketball this season in the national championship on a Sunday afternoon, and they lose to South Carolina. And South Carolina concludes their perfect season. Congrats to Dawn Staley and South Carolina women's basketball. Her third national title at that school. They complete the perfect season. But it is a legitimate question to ask, what does viewership and popularity of women's college basketball look like without Caitlin Clark? Without getting into specific predictions about numbers and all of those things, I'll answer this question simply by saying worse. I don't know how they're going to sustain numbers that they've had. 14.2 million people watched on a Friday night, late at night, when Iowa and UConn played. Everyone in the studio was glued to their televisions, watching that game on a Friday night. We're texting about it as the game goes final, as it's ending. It was compelling television.
The foul.
And Caitlin Clark was the biggest part of that. We can get into that semifinal game also. I think that's a lot of fuel for the people who say, boy, the NCAA and ESPN really want Caitlin Clark and Iowa in that national championship game, because when they had a chance, and UConn had a chance to win it at the buzzer or score to win it, that was a quick whistle on the moving screen. Was it a moving screen by definition? Probably.
Yeah.
Do I see far worse than that all the time in both men's and women's basketball? I've talked a lot about the dribble handoff moving screen that takes place on every single half-court possession.
3 seconds. I
was shocked they called it. All right. I'm also one who says if it's a foul in the beginning of the game, it's a foul at the end of the game. But
Chad,
I was shocked they called it in that moment.
And who did they call it against?
Gino and UConn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Had this been, like NC State or you just name another program along the way, I think you'd have more of the, they let that go.
But the fact we're even bringing that up as a possible conspiracy theory,
I know.
Hutton, is just further evidence that the game is not going to be the same without Caitlin Clark. And I'm not here to say that there's no more great players in women's college basketball and teams are worse. I think it's really good right now. I think parity's better. I think for too many years, UConn was too dominant, quite frankly. And I know I'm saying this in a year where South Carolina went unbeaten, but I saw that South Carolina team nearly lose to a mediocre Tennessee team twice. Mm-hmm. It's not like people didn't have a chance to beat them, throughout the season.
Right.
So I think the sport is in a good spot. I do think it's unrealistic to expect that it's going to continue to grow at the level we saw this past season. I think at best it has plateaued and it stays around those numbers next year. But I think in the more likely scenario is that ratings numbers decline post Caitlin Clark.
Well, and I think a lot of the ratings discussion is on the tournament and reading too much into what would the title game have been like. Because there's your answer. If Caitlin Clark's not advancing in the Final Four, if Iowa loses to LSU in the Elite Eight, the Final Four ratings go down, not up. They don't stay the same. So the answer to the question is simple. Even in the year where she's participating in women's college basketball, the ratings decline. Now, to what extent? I mean, the number that Richard Deitch put out there is pretty much spot on with all the different scenarios and teams and matchups. With what he thought would happen in the UConn rating, with the championship game, and whether or not Iowa would be participating. But had it been UConn and South Carolina, Chad, I think the estimate was, 10 to 12 million?
Yeah.
Compare those numbers to the World Series. Compare those numbers to the NBA Finals. So the ratings in perspective, they're good.
Still would have passed
they're
last
really
year's
good,
national championship game.
It's like, NFL ratings are on the decline. They're down 3%. It's still beating everyone's ass in the ratings. Still crushing 48 of the top 50 of the most watched shows in television every year. But if you put it in perspective of what does she mean, she takes them through the glass ceiling and beyond. And I think there's still this idea that, it's going to be capped here. You've got to have the personalities, you have to have the storylines, and it has to be organic. Because if you're going to manufacture and force feed the sports fan, by and large, you get a tune-out rating. It's a spark, right? Linsanity was a spark. But eventually that fades away. You have to have the consistency and the alpha play of Caitlin Clark in order to pull this off. So I think it's a no-brainer, and of course the ratings are going to decline. That shouldn't be the headline, though, because I still think they will surpass much of what we're seeing in a sports era where you either have the marketing capabilities or you don't. And women's college basketball, they have the momentum right now. Where's the NBA in all of this? What's the value of the WNBA is really good right now, and the timing is perfect for them because the media rights are being negotiated right now, and they're even considering splitting off from underneath the umbrella of the NBA for the media rights with ESPN, ABC, and whoever else will want to get involved. That's the point, is that even without Caitlin Clark or with Caitlin Clark, the value of the product is still better or greater or more. You're more willing to invest in it if you have the millions and billions than you are some of the other sports properties. I think it's football, by the way, with what everyone's wanting to purchase. And after that, it's women's college basketball and the WNBA. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're leading the show today, talking about Caitlin Clark over John Calipari going to Arkansas and Purdue and UConn, the showdown that we want, about to tip off in a matter of hours.
Well, and it's just, the lack of shared experiences in our country where everybody's around the television watching something at once. It's so few and far between. Mm-hmm. And Hutton, you said compelling, organic, all these different factors that make something watchable, where everybody's going to tune in. And women's basketball had that with Caitlin Clark, with the storylines of LSU and Angel Reese and South Carolina and all that. I would add another factor to that. It's got to be good. And I found myself watching the basketball Friday night. I'm like, this is good. I mean, those full court passes and transition game from Iowa, and not just Caitlin Clark, but some of the shots that were hit in transition, I was impressed. A high quality of play throughout. Paige Beckers was fantastic to watch for UConn. The Croatian woman that was guarding Caitlin Clark was incredible with her defense and how dogged she was in pursuit of her the whole night. I was impressed by the quality of play. But those lack of shared experiences, 14.2 million people watched Caitlin Clark in Iowa beat UConn in a close game in the national semifinal on a Friday night. That is a huge number. Hutton, you're right. That number now is reserved for football. It's reserved for Super Bowl, for big playoff games, for big NFL games in a primetime window. Nothing else is really getting those numbers. A little perspective, and I was reading up on this because the show Curb Your Enthusiasm ended last night. Curb Your Enthusiasm started 24 years ago in the year 2000. This was shortly after Seinfeld went off the air, I believe, in 1998. When Seinfeld went off the air in 1998, Hutton, 72 million Americans tuned in. on that night to watch the finale of Seinfeld, okay? That was a monocultural moment.
This goes to your point.
That was in the monoculture because television mattered and network television mattered then, and people watched and people knew Seinfeld. They wanted to see how it was going to end. One of the latest in the last few years big monocultural events was the conclusion of Game of Thrones. And when that show ended, 20 million people tuned in and watched on that Sunday night. It's an enormous number on HBO for that show. Last year, maybe the biggest TV event that happened was the finale of Succession. 2.9 million people watched Succession. For as big as that was in television culture, you went from 72 million in 1998 to watch Seinfeld to 20 million in 2019, I want to say it was, for Game of Thrones, had 20 million, and then 2.9 million for Succession. I say all that in television that TV shows used to matter and other sports used to matter other than football, which leads me to say 14.2 million, which is 7 times the amount of people that watch the finale of Succession, is gigantic for women's sports, not just women's basketball, for women's sports. And it puts Caitlin Clark in a pantheon of true celebrities in American culture in sport that we haven't seen a lot of. Now, Caitlin Clark exits stage left, stage right, whichever stage you want to go. She's out of the sport. What's next? Are they going to continue to capitalize? Is it going to continue to be numbers close to that? I don't know how you can replicate it.
Well,
it's very tough to do. It's tough to capture everyone's imagination.
It's not just the record-setting performances, though. You know, you're right about it being entertaining. Antoine Davis was this last year at Detroit Mercy. He nearly broke the record.
Yeah.
You know, he's bombing threes everywhere. You didn't hear about him until it was tournament time, and they didn't play the tournament.
Yeah.
Until he's right on the cusp of breaking Pistol Pete's record. With all he does is shoot threes, and he already set the three-point record for college hoops. And he played, 5 years, 6 years? I mean, he played a while. This in comparison, there's drama behind it. You know, there's a movement to watch the product, and it's from a ratings perspective. What does that mean for the networks and investing in the product? It's DVR proof. And you have the drama behind it to where you're going to sit through commercials, and you're not necessarily going to do that on your app. So 3 million for a finale on an app is great.
Yeah.
But as far as ad sales are concerned, the advertisers are going to buy sports. Keep that in mind. Because it's about everyone and the shared moment. You're exactly right. And everyone's talking about it. You're either on one side or the other, right? And here we are, not much discussion about South Carolina and what they've just done. It's about what Caitlin Clark has just done to the sport itself. It was other than Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, Caitlin Clark's number 2 on the list. Number 2 on the list of the most discussed people right now. Just think about what you're discussing at work on a daily basis. With anyone down the hallway, or while you're grabbing a coffee at Starbucks, you're hearing those names. That's pretty much it. And
she helped everyone in the sport. I think she's helped coaches get a little bit richer. I think she's helped a lot of players that she played against, their popularity and fame.
Think about what she's about to be.
Think about Angel Reese and how she's benefited from it. Now, she'd tell you that her worst year of her life was after she won the national title, but she's benefited in many ways also.
Angel Reese helped out Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, they helped each other. But I would say Caitlin Clark helped her out more than vice versa, but still, they certainly helped each other. I don't know how they continue at this torrid pace. But it doesn't matter right now because it is the moment, and they capitalized on it. By they, I mean women's college basketball as a whole. There was just something so surprising about Caitlin Clark, and I'm not going to dive into the infested waters that Paul Pierce dove into, saying, oh, I cannot believe this white girl beat a bunch of black girls. I'm not saying that. But when you see Caitlin Clark and how she plays the game and where she shoots the ball and just her physically, nothing to do with race, versus some other players she's competing against, it's surprising when you see that. The same way we were all surprised when we saw Steph Curry draining threes from near half court, starting out at Davidson, even before he got to the NBA. It was surprising to see someone who looks like that, of that stature, that was able to do those things. And I think when you can truly surprise the public, you can get something that is incredible.
Yeah, and you can.
And
do
that's
it,
what we just witnessed.
And you can have this flash. Golke can have his moment, his one shining moment. But every single game, the dominance of how much fun she is to watch, not was, but is to watch play the sport. And I think Steph Curry's a great name to bring up because the discussion, okay, who's the next MJ? It's going to be LeBron. We had a discussion 2 months ago. Who's the next LeBron? Who's the next face of the league? Steph's, 30-something years old now.
Yep.
Considered old by professional athlete standards.
Definitely on the back leg of his career.
Yeah. But he's the NBA faces are in their 30s. You know, Durant. There's a list. She's certainly the face of women's basketball. And the next version of her is probably mimicking her right now in a gym about to go to high school.
Yeah.
Because that's what kids did with Steph Curry. You know, I grew up, we wanted to lower the goal to 8 feet and have a dunk contest. Now you want to have a three-point shootout. You know, like that's the next version. Because can you name the next face of women's college basketball right now?
Well, and does it
like right at this very moment?
Does it matter where that girl that's in the high school gym right now, wherever in America in 8th grade, getting ready to go to high school, that is going to play like Caitlin Clark next and be that player?
Yeah.
Does it matter where she attends school?
No.
I think it might.
I don't think so.
And I'll tell you why. We've seen the white superstar player at a place like UConn a lot. Heck, they were all either at the game or calling it. Sue Bird,
right?
Diana Taurasi, Breanna Stewart.
That's been the sport.
Yeah, we've all gone, but it's not. That's not surprising.
Right.
I still think we need a little shock factor. Little Caitlin Clark chucking up threes and breaking records at little old Iowa. I know Iowa's a big university, but little old Iowa compared to UConn and some of these other powers, that still captures our imagination, and it shocks us a bit. I think if that next player goes to a dominant power like a South Carolina right now, or a UConn, or you name those teams that have been there and done that, I don't think it's quite the same. Let me also say this. I don't want to hear about her not winning a championship as something against her for not being considered the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
We can have the debate about whether or not she's the greatest of all time, and you can have your opinion on that one way or the other. I would argue back-to-back national championship games at Iowa with her supporting cast is an amazing accomplishment. And losing to the team she lost to, LSU a year ago, great. South Carolina this year, one of the greatest women's college basketball teams in the history of the game. And they had a great first quarter, and they're in that game into the second half, and they lose. But I don't take those two losses, Hutton, and think, boy, I can't say that she's one of the greatest of all time simply because she never won a national title.
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking about, what does it matter what school that this next version of superstar power attend? I mean, I'm not saying that you can go to Kent State and be on ABC every week. Again, it has to happen in an organic fashion. But if you just look at the tournament itself and just some of the programs there, I mean, South Carolina's playing NC State in the Final Four.
Yeah.
You know? Beyond that, you have Texas, Alabama, Gonzaga, just the women's programs. Tennessee's there was, a 6 or a 7 seed, I believe, in this tournament. Iowa State, Stanford, Ohio State. I mean, you still have the main college powers, but you also have Indiana women's, Colorado women's team, Kansas State, Oregon State. I mean, there are still those programs that are 2 and 3 and 4 seeds in this bracket. That if they had Caitlin Clark, the storyline would be the same.
Yeah, but I think there is like a perfect cocktail of everything, and you either shake it or stir it. But if you get that cocktail, you can recapture that to some extent. But it's everything with Caitlin Clark. She's from the state of Iowa, so she's kind of got the hometown hero vibe to it.
Yes.
Her game is surprising when you watch her play. You mix all those things together with an extreme amount of winning for Iowa women's basketball, and it worked out perfectly. And I think there's a lot of different scenarios where it happens again, but there does have to be a specific formula to nail the algorithm as to how it's going to happen.
And part of it too is we don't really know.
And I don't think the player coming from out of state to go to a basketball power that's won multiple national titles is going to be the formula for it to happen again.
With a coach that comes from Baylor, like let's use LSU, with Mulkey, you've got the story, the names.
Yeah.
There was an unknown factor.
It's going to be some farm girl from Indiana that takes Indiana Hoosiers women's basketball places they've never been.
Yeah, it's bombing half-court shots right now.
Right. It's something like that where it's surprising when you see it happen. And Caitlin Clark shattered a lot of expectations and stereotypes and did a lot. I hate it when Brianna Stewart, I think, was the one who says, no, she can't be considered the greatest if she doesn't win a title. And Brianna Stewart won 4. Brianna Stewart had an amazing supporting cast around her in an era where UConn had no close equal also.
Yeah.
It's an amazing accomplishment. I'm not trying to take anything away from her, but I do think the Brianna Stewarts of the world need to understand her supporting cast and women's college basketball in her time versus what Caitlin Clark, who she's playing with, and who she's playing against in the women's game. Before you just throw out no, she needs to win one before we consider her one of the greatest. I don't buy that.
Well, the South Carolina program, certainly one of the greatest we've seen with their dominance and what they've done with the unbeaten season and beating Iowa on that stage. And because of that stage, our own Dan Z of OutKick attended the presser that took place just prior to the game. And Don Staley, with the increased media attention around the sport and the spotlight around the weekend of the Final Four, Dan Z of OutKick had this question to Don Staley.
Dan Zakrzewski, OutKick coach, you just talked about, what a massive weekend this is, obviously, for women's basketball, women's sports in general. One of the major issues facing women's sports right now is the discussion topic about the inclusion of transgender athletes, biological males, in women's sports. I was wondering if you would tell me your position on that issue.
Damn, you got deep on me, didn't you? I'm under the opinion of if you're a woman, you should play. If you consider yourself a woman and you want to play sports or vice versa, you should be able to play. That's my opinion. You want me to go deeper?
Do you think transgender women should be able to participate in
That's your question you
college
want
basketball?
me to ask. You want to ask, so I'll give you that. Yes. So now the barnstorm of people are going to flood my timeline and be a distraction to me on one of the biggest days of our game. And I'm okay with that. I really am.
There's Don Staley, women's basketball coach at South Carolina, saying that transgender and men should play in women's college basketball. The coach of the unbeaten South Carolina Gamecocks, who went on to win the national title, is saying, yeah, a man can come play. And can you stammer and stutter any more than that prior to answering the question?
Boy.
Not wanting to answer the question, but answering it. And she's saying, for everyone's going to flood my social media. She's sitting there in real time, Chad, thinking, okay, which of the haters do I want to hear more from in my account? I think she's genuinely thinking that. And imagine the flood of social media following that would be it would be the storyline on the opposite side of things, and for good reason, because she would be correct if she said no. This is a sport for women, which is obvious.
I spent some time watching the question and her reaction to it, and the silence and long pauses she takes and everything else. I don't believe her. I don't believe she believes herself when she's saying it. I don't think she's outwardly trying to lie, but Hutton, I do think you're on to something here. It's almost like in real time we're watching someone consider, what should I say to not say too much, even if I want to go down this rabbit hole on this question and say something, what is going to be the most tolerated response on social media with everyone else? And the response was something along the lines of, I'll make it as simple as possible by saying, I'm of the opinion that if you want to play sports, you can play sports.
If you consider yourself a
If you
woman, you
consider
can play.
yourself a woman and you want to play, you should be able to play. And then the follow-up from Dan Z leads her to say, yeah, I think they should be able to play. I'm somewhat sympathetic to Dawn Staley, who's getting ready for a national championship game that was hit with a pretty heavy question. And I am thankful to her for actually answering and not just no commenting or trying to move along and giving it some consideration. I don't know that I have a really strong, visceral, negative response to what she said because, again, I don't think she's a liar. I don't think she's trying to lie, but I heard the voice of someone who does not fully believe what they're saying. And it's almost like they're just trying to get through the answer without offending too many people and without saying too much. Now, I also, on the flip side of that, it is science. There are men and there are women. And Dawn Staley, even if she's not going to just answer the question the way we all would answer the question, I believe knows this to be a fact about the men's game and the women's game. I wish she would have said it. I really do.
But her answer,
I wish she would have said it.
So science, yes. I mean, it's It's two genders, by the way. Let's be definitive here.
Yes.
Two genders. It's obvious. It's genetics. It's biology.
What's the line from Rocky IV?
But Dawn
it's
Staley,
science. Genetics, gentlemen.
Watching this and watching her think through her answer. She's also been a coach that sits at a podium and champions the diversity of the sport, how there needs to be equitable pay in NIL for black players. So if I just declare myself black, does Dawn Staley think that I'm African American now? Because that's what she just said. I should be able to participate and declare myself a part of what she's championing. Of course she's not going to say that. Just like I don't believe she really buys into what she just said there at the podium. But no one's going to ask that question or follow up with that. Dan Z is going to join us coming up. But, it's just it's stupid, nonsensical, and ridiculous. Put this on a loop. Stupid, nonsensical, ridiculous, and a flat-out lie. And there you have it. Everyone watching OutKick right now agrees, and no one else is going to discuss it, and that's the path she chose. That's the path she chose. That's what this is in real time. We just watched it.
I'm just laughing now at Hutton becoming the Rachel Dolezal, Sean King, Elizabeth Warren of minority hires, of DEI hires.
But think about it.
Because he defines himself as African American.
I believe if you consider yourself a woman, you should play, is what she said. Then the follow-up. So I think a lot of, if you just read that one quote, it's, she didn't say that the dude should play in women's sports. She just said the dude should play if he considers himself a woman. Yeah. Well,
and that is the way she was saying in the beginning. She didn't fully go
asked a follow-up to it.
And that's when she clarified.
And
with
specific to women's college basketball.
Yeah, she clarified with something stupid. It's also, people that, here's where we've come to this, and we talked to Riley Gaines recently about it. At least this is where and maybe I'm completely off on this because Hutton, I was surprised the amount of people on social media that championed her answering the question the way she did. Because those people have been fewer and further between, right? But, oh, my gosh, what a stud. Look at this rock star, Dawn Staley, that took this moment to answer this question this way and fighting for trans rights and doing this. And I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, you are completely missing the point about this.
It doesn't look like she's fighting for it.
I think that it's easy. I think it's easy to answer a question one way because we're talking about identification here again now, how you identify. But if you identify with one viewpoint or one side of the aisle or the other, it's easy to answer a question a certain way when that answer doesn't directly affect you.
Right.
Because right now, there aren't a bunch of dudes running around women's basketball playing at the highest level that I'm aware of, at least. Who knows? New world we live in. Maybe there are penises running around the women's basketball court also dominating somewhere, and we don't know about it yet. But to my knowledge, we don't have that right now in the game.
Well, hang on, though.
If there are a couple of mid-major bigs that decide to identify as a woman and transfer to Kentucky to start playing women's basketball, and they start beating Dawn Staley and her women's team, I think her answer would be different. And I don't think anyone wants to consider that, but it is a slippery, slippery slope. And when you allow it in certain sports at certain levels, it will eventually trickle up. And I think that's difficult for the powers that be at the height of their respective sports to fully understand until it gets here. And what people are trying to do is stop it before it gets to that level. And that's not a bad thing to do. This is not a bad thing to stop. And that's the point most are trying to make. I feel like most are trying to make, but then I see the response on social media, and I think, have we really made any progress with this?
Well, but here's the thing, though. Dawn Staley's not trying to stop it with that answer. I don't think she's wanting to coach a guy on her team.
No.
So
or coach against a guy.
Right. But also, this is the same coach, Chad, that's in a year where it's the attention to the women's sport has never been greater. Okay. And said that she had some great thoughts on Caitlin Clark, by the way, too.
Yeah.
Dawn Staley, to her credit. Was it the SEC tournament game where LSU and South Carolina got into it, and she had the podium and said, "I don't want to represent my sport this way, our sport this way. I don't want to come across this way." She's allowing for this to be representative of women's college basketball. Again, she's speaking out of both sides of her mouth, and she's doing it because the reaction's going to be different, when really it's just like they don't want the social media mob coming after them. And in real time, we saw that play out on the podium with Dan Z's question to her. And in a moment where, why do you ask that question there? Because the attention's on the sport there. Because the access is there. You ask that question at a random women's game on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night somewhere in Columbia, Missouri, it's going to stay right there in Columbia, Missouri, whenever she's on the road, right? When South Carolina's playing at Missouri, Columbia against Columbia, or whatever. That's why you ask it on that platform.
I don't consider Dawn Staley a coward at all. I think she is a fighter. She's a fighter of a coach. She was a fighter as a player. And this is why it's so disappointing to me. I believe she answered a question in a way where she actually in real time considered, who am I more okay with them being mad at me? And she said, I'm way more okay with the group that's all anti-transgender playing in women's sports being mad at me than the other side of this equation. And she didn't answer it honestly. And I think if you're brave and courageous or whatever adjectives you want to throw out there, you just answer questions honestly the way you feel like it. I don't think she did that.
I just hate fake people, though, because she will also – there's a lot of people like this.
This was a fake answer.
A lot of people like this because she's up there saying, oh, the black women on the desk, on the analyst desk, holding it down on ESPN for the college coverage, right, on ABC or whatever. She's holding it down. They're doing a great job, whatever. She'd be advocating for more women on that desk if it was a bunch of dudes up there talking women's college basketball. In this case, she's not doing it. I mean, again, like it's the easy way out, and it's fake. And I hate fake. And this is just in real time seeing it. And, you know, just the contemplating what's going to be worse, hearing the honest truth that is there are two genders. There's women's basketball and men's basketball. Even though we've got Rob Parker saying that Caitlin Clark should play in the NBA? Idiot.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Forgot about that guy.
Yeah. Again, it's I don't see Dawn Staley coaching some dude, although she did say you're a woman and play women's college basketball.
Well, and it's one of those where if you want to throw out all these titles for everything, you are being progressive and you're being a feminist if you're on the side of women should play women's sports instead of the other side that Dawn Staley apparently is on. That's what's crazy about all this. People who champion themselves, I'm progressive, I'm open-minded, right. I'm this and that. There's nothing progressive about this. This is regressing to an area where men are taking opportunities from women, directly taking it from women. This is not what you're espousing. This is not what you want. If you label yourself a feminist or a progressive or whatever title you want to give yourself, the progressive feminist viewpoint is that of Riley Gaines and others that are championing, wait for it, women playing against women and men playing against men. Period.
At some point, not everything's
equal.
End of
story.
You can champion the equality. At some point, not everything's equal. And you run out of things to complain about, and it's on to the next thing. And in this case, it just makes no sense. The idea too. I'm just going back thinking about Reggie Miller. Don't put boundaries on that three-point line.
Boundaries on this young lady.
I guess the NCAA tournament was sexist.
Yeah.
I guess we saw that.
You know where they're really
we saw
sexist?
a women's three-point line and a women's college basketball.
You know where they're really sexist? Shockingly, Portland, Oregon. Very progressive
Really?
place. Remember they had the different three-point lines?
No, not sexist.
On each side. Remember it was different.
They didn't
different
put boundaries.
slants on different sides?
Both teams did.
But I feel like they were trying to be sexist by showing one side of the court allowing more three-pointers hit than the other side of the court when it was a deeper
but
three.
It would have been sexist to change it back.
They're trying to point out that men are superior again. Those damn anti-feminists in Portland, Oregon. Who knew? Just a couple of feminists here, Hutton and Withrow, doing a show, trying to protect women's spaces and women's sports.
I mean, it's just we are sitting here.
Don Staley doesn't want this. That's why it's
like
I would have an
but
easier
it's
time.
It's going to take coaches on her. It's because of the platform that the question is asked. And for the life of me, please end this bullshit. Please. It takes people like Don Staley to do it.
Yeah.
Say it. So I don't have to keep talking about this crap every day. Put this on a loop. Please.
Amen. And if she said it, the people that were going on social media.
Do not edit this out either, by the way.
The people that
Two
were
genders.
Absolutely.
Put this on YouTube.
The people that were going out there, YouTube's going to love this segment. The people that were going out there and putting
so
themselves
stupid.
on a limb or acting like they were on social media, saying that, boy, look at this stud, Don Staley, and what she's doing and this. They would have been silent if she answered the correct way, which the correct way would have been, no, women should play women's sports and men should play men's sports. Period. End of story. If she just said that, I really believe those same people, though, they would not have criticized her. They would have remained silent because deep down they know
ESPN
that we're right.
Is going to let you say anything right now. Just ask Pat McAfee and anybody that's going after executives.
Yeah.
They're not going to call out the unbeaten champions of South Carolina and the black head coach for championing women's sports.
I think that she
Please
probably
end this crap.
Hutton, she could have changed a lot of minds. I think had she answered the way
But you
we
can,
know that she.
You
I
can see
believe
her
she thinks.
thinking that. Like, we're going to go deep here. It's really not that deep.
No.
You sound like an idiot, and no one's going to call you that whenever you're championing any other thing because you just allow me to. We don't have to agree on everything in this country. I do need to understand why you feel this way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't have to agree with you. I need to understand why you're doing it. And if I can't do that and you can't explain why, you're full of shit. Period. And that goes across the board with a lot of people right now on both sides. Both sides. And you know it. And you continue to just let this continue down this path. End it. It's that simple. And I'm glad Danzy asked the question.
One of the most powerful words, Hutton, to follow up on your point, in the English language is why. Ask that question to people. When you question what they're thinking or why they're doing something, just ask them why and see if they have a response. A lot of people who are in position to make decisions, in positions of power, if you just throw that one word back at them when they state their opinion or state a reason, why? Ask them why.
Why did you say this?
And find out if they know what they're talking about.
I'm doing it right now. I'm looking up quotes from Don Staley from 3 months ago. And 3 months later, she's doing the opposite of champion women's sports. It's very cyclical.
So why?
Change it back and forth.
So the question would be why?
And if you can't, right. So the follow-up would be, I would think the criticism, Chad, if you're on the side of transgender playing, why haven't you allowed that to happen?
Yeah, that would have been. I doubt Dan was allowed another follow-up at that point, but if he were, that would have been a great follow-up question.
Don Staley allowed him to follow up.
Let me introduce you to my son, who's here and considering becoming a woman. He would like to play for the South Carolina Lady Gamecocks. Please, he is 6'11". Would you like to play for him to play center for you? Camila Cardoso, who is a transcendent talent, is 6'7" or 6'8". We're going to watch a 7'4" man go head-to-head with a 7'1" man tonight for the men's national championship. Imagine that infiltrating the women's game. It would be
Zach Edey.
awful for everyone involved.
Zach Edey doesn't have the same NIL abilities because of the Canadian background.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he identified as a woman, he could go just dominate the women's game right now, Chad. Don Staley said so.
He'd do State Farm ads like Caitlin Clark
Don Staley said so.
if he were in the women's game.